If someone had told me even a year ago that I'd be starting over at 73, I would have chuckled, patted them on the back, and offered to buy them a pint for making me laugh. I mean, after everything I've been through in this life, decades of hard work, heartbreak, loss, you'd think nothing could surprise me anymore. But life has a cruel sense of humor. My name's Gerald Whitmore. For over 45 years I worked in construction, started off hauling bricks and mixing cement, ended up supervising entire builds from blueprint to ribbon cutting. I was never rich, but I was smart with what I had. While my mates were betting on horses and downing pints, I was budgeting, fixing broken faucets myself instead of calling a plumber, tucking away coins like a squirrel facing a long winter. And all of it, every saved penny, every late-night overtime, every calloused hand, was for my family. For my wife Lillian mostly. God rest her soul. She was the kind of woman that lit up a room with a smile. Strong, witty, sharp-tongued when needed, but soft where it counted. She believed in me more than I ever believed in myself. Told me I had builder's hands and a banker's brain. I lost her 5 years ago to a stroke that came too fast and too cruel. Since then my days grew longer, emptier. The house we shared became unbearably quiet. I started talking to the walls, sometimes responding to old jokes we used to share. My daughter Meredith would call every other week, sometimes less. She had a family of her own, a busy life, and I didn't want to be the overbearing dad who lingered too long or talked too much. Still, the loneliness, it settles into your bones. No matter how warm the tea or how loud the telly, it just stays. That's when I got the idea. I had savings, a few rental flats bringing in monthly income. Lillian and I had always lived modestly, so the bank account had grown over the years. I wasn't sitting on a fortune, but I had enough. So I thought, what if I used it for something bigger? Not just more years lived alone in silence, but a chance to reunite the family. To create a home again, not a place with dusty furniture and fading wedding portraits, but a place filled with life, laughter, meals around the table, the sound of children running up and down the stairs. I imagined it all. Meredith and her husband, Evan, moving in with their kids. A big old house with creaky stairs and sun-drenched windows, where we'd share breakfasts on Sundays and garden together in the spring. It could be a fresh start for all of us. I made the call that same evening. Meredith, I said, I've got an idea. We met at a small cafe near her office. She looked tired, older than I remembered, stress written in the corners of her eyes. But when I told her my plan, I saw something flicker behind her polite surprise. Was it hope? Maybe curiosity? Or maybe calculation? Are you sure, Dad? She asked. It's a big commitment. I've never been more sure, I smiled. I want to be near my family, and I don't want you worrying about rent or cramped space anymore. She hesitated, twisting her wedding ring nervously. Well, let me talk to Evan about it. 2 days later, they both came by my house. Evan, who usually greeted me with a nod and a strained smile, was suddenly all warmth and enthusiasm. He slapped me on the back, called me Pops for the first time ever, and raved about how generous and forward-thinking I was. That should have been the first red flag. Still, I ignored it. I wanted this to work, needed it to. We started house hunting together. Big places, beautiful ones, places that cost far more than I originally intended to spend. But I convinced myself it was worth it, that this was the home Lillian and I never got to enjoy, that I could leave a legacy behind, not in money but in memories. We eventually found it, a gorgeous old Victorian on the edge of town. Wide porch, oak floors, arched windows that bathed the rooms in morning light. 5 bedrooms. A garden just waiting to bloom. Meredith's eyes lit up when she saw it. This could really be home, she whispered. That was all the confirmation I needed. I sold 2 of my rentals. With those funds plus my savings, I made the purchase in full. No loans, no debt. 100% paid for. Evan insisted it'd be easier legally if the deed went under their names. Less paperwork, he said. Less inheritance drama. I hesitated, but then Meredith chimed in gently. It's all still yours, Dad. This is your home as much as ours. So I signed. The first night we got the keys, I stood on the front steps and watched the sunset spill over the roof. For the first time in a long time, I felt hope blooming inside me. This would be the beginning of something beautiful. For the first few weeks after we moved in, everything felt like a dream. The house was buzzing with life, boxes being unpacked, furniture dragged across floors, kids running through rooms, voices echoing in the hallways. I had my own bedroom on the ground floor, spacious and bright, with an attached bathroom. Evan joked that it was the grandpa suite, and I laughed along, thinking it was a gesture of kindness. At dinner, we'd sit together around the long oak table. Meredith cooked hearty meals, the kids bickered about trivial things, and Evan told exaggerated stories from his workday. It wasn't perfect, but it was warm, noisy, and full of the kind of life I'd missed for years. I pitched in where I could. Fixed leaky taps, replaced a broken banister, repainted Hazel's room the exact shade of lavender she wanted. I even set up a tiny herb garden in the back. It felt good to be useful again. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, the tone began to shift. It started small. I'd walk into the living room and the conversation would fall silent, or I'd offer to help with dinner, and Meredith would gently say, "It's fine, Dad, go rest." Evan stopped calling me Pops and reverted to Gerald. The kids became more distant. Their good nights turned into vague nods, and the spark of excitement they'd once shown now flickered out like a dying candle. I tried not to read too much into it. Moving was stressful. Maybe they just needed time to settle. Still, a strange weight began to press on me. Then came the housewarming idea. "We should throw a party," Meredith said one morning over coffee. "Invite some friends, colleagues, the neighbors. It'd be nice to show off the place a bit." "Absolutely," I replied with genuine excitement. "This house deserves to be seen. I can help get it ready." Evan glanced up from his phone. "Don't worry about it, Gerald. We've got it covered. You just relax and enjoy yourself." That stung a little, but I nodded. Over the next week, preparations ramped up. Meredith hired a caterer. Evan organized drinks and music. Even the kids got involved, decorating, making playlists, arranging furniture. I offered to help repeatedly. Every time I was met with the same response. "It's fine, Dad. We want you to take it easy." At first I chalked it up to care. Maybe they were being considerate. Maybe they didn't want me to overwork myself. But the more it happened, the more it felt like they were politely excluding me. On the day of the party, I dressed carefully. Navy blue suit, freshly ironed shirt, polished shoes. I used the cologne Lillian once gave me for our anniversary. I stood in front of the mirror and smiled. Tonight would be my night too. After all, none of this would have been possible without me. When I stepped out of my room, the house was transformed. Candles flickered in glass jars, soft music played in the background, trays of hors d'oeuvres lined the counters. Guests were already arriving. I approached Meredith and Evan in the hallway. "Everything looks amazing," I said. "Can I greet the guests with you?" Evan hesitated. "Sure. Just don't mention anything about paying for the house, all right? Let's keep things simple." "What do you mean?" I frowned. "You know," he shrugged, "no need to confuse people. Just say we're happy to be here." Before I could respond, the doorbell rang, and the moment passed. Throughout the evening I smiled, shook hands, answered polite questions. But something felt off. No one I knew had been invited. Not a single old friend, former colleague, or neighbor from my old life. These were all their people. Co-workers, gym friends, school parents. Strangers in a home I bought. At one point, a man about my age complimented the house. "Beautiful place," he said. "How long have you lived here?" "Oh, we just moved in," I said proudly. I bought it so we could all live together. The man raised an eyebrow. You bought it? Before I could answer, Evan stepped in. He means we all contributed. Gerald helped with the down payment. We're very lucky. He placed a firm hand on my shoulder. The grip was just a little too tight. Right, Gerald? I forced a smile and nodded. Later, when the crowd had thinned, Evan pulled me aside into the kitchen. We talked about this, he hissed, his voice low. You need to stop saying you bought the house. But it's true, I said, trying to keep my tone even. And it makes me look like a man who can't provide for his family, he snapped. Do you want that? I said nothing. He left me standing there, shame curling in my chest like smoke. By the end of the night, I retreated to my room. I sat on the edge of the bed, still in my suit, the laughter from the party muffled through the walls. Something had shifted. I had wanted a family, a legacy, a home. But as I stared at the ceiling, I felt more like a guest in a place I no longer recognized. The days following the housewarming party confirmed what I hadn't wanted to admit. I didn't belong here. Not really. At first, I told myself it was just post-party stress. Everyone was tired. Meredith went back to her shifts at the clinic. Evan returned to running his company, and the kids were buried in school and screens. It was normal for the energy to dip. But it wasn't just the quiet, it was the avoidance. I stopped being invited to family dinners. Meredith began bringing my meals to my room, placing the plate on my desk with a quick, distracted smile. The kids need the dining table to do homework, she'd say. You understand, right, Dad? Of course I understood. I always understood. I started to feel like a tenant, no, a boarder, inside the home I had purchased. When I tried to help in the kitchen or offered to do laundry, I was politely dismissed. We've got it, Dad. Just relax. Even the garden, once my personal sanctuary, began to feel off-limits. One afternoon I was pruning the hedges when Evan came outside, brows furrowed. Hey, maybe don't mess around out here when the kids are playing. Hazel almost tripped on your tools. She didn't say anything. I replied, surprised. Well, she felt uncomfortable. Just give them space, okay? I nodded. I always nodded. But the worst part wasn't the coldness. It was the realization that none of this was an accident. It was planned, crafted, designed. I began noticing small things. How their wing of the house, yes, their wing, was subtly off-limits. How doors were always closed. How even casual conversations happened in hushed voices if I entered the room. Then came the moment that made it all click. I had returned from a walk earlier than usual. The sun was just setting as I stepped through the front door, and that's when I heard them, Meredith and Evan, talking in the kitchen. I was about to call out when I caught my name. He's always here, Evan said in a low, irritated voice. Watching, commenting, breathing down my neck. He's just trying to help, Meredith replied, but her tone was tired. This isn't working, it's suffocating. I feel like a guest in my own home. There was a pause. What do you want me to do? Meredith asked. We need to talk about other options, Evan said. I mean it. We can't keep pretending this is working. I stepped back into the hallway, my chest tight, my legs weak. I don't remember how I got to my room. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the floor. So this was it. 2 weeks into our new life, and I was already seen as a burden. Still, part of me held on to hope. Maybe things would settle. Maybe I was just too sensitive. Maybe that conversation didn't mean what I thought it meant. Then Meredith suggested a second event. A formal housewarming party for their colleagues and community friends. Something bigger. We want everyone to see the new place, she said, handing me an invitation list I hadn't contributed to. That sounds lovely, I said, forcing a smile. Can I help with planning? No need, Evan chimed in. Just show up and look sharp, Gerald. You're the proud patriarch, right? The way he said it, like it was a role I was supposed to play, not live. The day of the party, the house buzzed with energy again. Caterers came in and out. Balloons and banners were strung up. Music tests echoed through the hall. I got dressed in my best suit, dark gray, with the tie Lillian gave me for our last anniversary. I combed my hair, trimmed my beard, and stared at myself in the mirror. I looked like a man getting ready to be celebrated. Instead, I was getting ready to be erased. As the party kicked off, I found myself drifting along the edges of every room, shaking hands, nodding politely. People asked me where I lived. "In that room over there," I said. "It's my house, too." A few guests raised eyebrows. One man even chuckled. "Oh, I thought this was Evan and Meredith's place." Before I could respond, Evan slid in again. "He's just being modest. He helped us a lot with the down payment. We're really grateful." That word again, helped. I wanted to shout the truth. I bought this house. Every square inch of it. With my money, my sacrifices, my dreams. But I said nothing, because shouting wouldn't change the truth that nobody in that room wanted to hear. I returned to my room and closed the door. Alone, I sat by the window and looked out at the stars. For a brief moment, I imagined what Lillian would say if she were still here. Would she tell me to fight, to demand respect? Or would she, too, fall silent like Meredith? A knock came at the door. Then the door opened, no waiting, no pause. Meredith and Evan walked in, serious-faced. "Dad, we need to talk." Meredith sat on the edge of my bed, twisting the hem of her blouse like she used to do as a nervous teenager. Evan remained standing, arms crossed tightly over his chest. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. His expression already had the weight of a verdict. I looked from one to the other, the silence pressing in around us. "What's going on?" I finally asked, though I already knew. Meredith inhaled shakily. "Dad, we've been thinking about things lately. About space, privacy, about what's best for everyone." I didn't say a word, just waited. "This arrangement," she gestured vaguely around the room, "it's not working as we hoped." I almost smiled. Hoped, as if this had ever been about hope. Evan jumped in. "Look, Gerald, you've been generous. No one's denying that. But your presence here is, well, it's interfering with the rhythm of our family." "Interfering," I repeated. "The kids don't feel comfortable bringing their friends over. Meredith and I can't relax. There's just no privacy. We're constantly walking on eggshells." I turned to my daughter. "Is this how you feel too, Meredith?" She looked away. "The house was supposed to bring us closer, but it's become awkward, tense." "And what exactly do you suggest I do?" Evan didn't flinch. "We've looked into options. There's a retirement community not far from here, Oak Ridge Haven. Quiet, clean, professional staff. You'd have your own space, company your own age. It's a good place." I stared at him, the words not fully sinking in. "You're suggesting I move to a nursing home?" "It's not a nursing home per se," he said quickly. "It's independent living. You'd be better off there, really." "And this house?" Meredith met my eyes. "It would just be easier for all of us." "But I bought this house," I said, my voice low. "I paid for every brick and nail and floorboard, with the money I spent my life earning." "Technically," Evan said, drawing out the word like a weapon, "it's in our names. You signed the deed over. We didn't force you." That moment broke something in me. I stood up, my hands trembling slightly, not from age but from rage. Not the kind that makes you shout, the kind that chills your blood. "You two planned this," I said, "from the start." "Don't be dramatic, Dad," Meredith said. "We just didn't expect it to feel so crowded." "Crowded?" I laughed bitterly. "This house has 5 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, and a separate den, and yet I'm too much for you to bear." "We're not throwing you out," she said. "Yes, you are," I snapped. "You just want to do it politely." They looked at each other. Then Meredith said, We've already scheduled a cab. It'll be here in an hour. An hour. I walked to my dresser, pulled open the top drawer and began folding shirts, mechanically, as if packing for a weekend trip, not an exile. You don't have to rush, Meredith said, her voice softening. I won't make a scene, I muttered. You've done enough for the both of us. 15 minutes later, Hazel poked her head into my room without knocking. Grandpa's packing, she asked with a smirk. Clive stood behind her, arms crossed. Don't forget your pills and slippers, Clive added, grinning. Out, I said sharply, my voice hard and unfamiliar. Hazel laughed and shut the door behind her. The suitcase was half full now. I paused only once, to place the photo of Lillian on top, wrapped carefully in a sweater she had knitted years ago. A knock came, Evan again. You ready? I nodded. The car's waiting. I picked up the suitcase and followed him down the hall. As we passed the living room, Meredith stood by the fireplace, holding a glass of wine. Her face was blank. Our eyes met. She didn't say anything. Not goodbye, not thank you, not I'm sorry. Just silence. I stepped outside into the cool night air. The cab was idling at the curb. I slid into the back seat, closed the door behind me and didn't look back. Where to? The driver asked. I had no answer. A hotel, I finally said. In a place will do. As we pulled away, I glanced out the window one last time. The house I dreamed would bring us together was glowing with warmth, laughter, music. A celebration was still happening inside. And the man who made it all possible had been quietly erased. The Harborview Hotel didn't overlook a harbor. That much became clear the moment I stepped into the tiny, musty room and opened the curtains to face a brick wall covered in graffiti and old chewing gum. The wallpaper peeled at the corners. The bed creaked if I even looked at it, and the air conditioner wheezed like it was taking its final breaths. But that night it became my refuge. I didn't sleep, not really. I lay on top of the covers in my suit, staring at the ceiling, trying to stitch the day into something that made sense. But it didn't. No matter how I turned it, smoothed it, rewrote it in my mind, it kept unraveling. I had been erased, cut out of the life I had built. And for what? A quiet house, an uninterrupted dinner, a little space. In the morning I checked out and began the slow walk through a city that suddenly felt foreign. My own city. My hometown. But now, every street, every building felt like it belonged to someone else. I visited a few listings for small rentals, dragging my suitcase behind me like a prisoner with his chains. Most were too expensive, too cramped, or outright insulting. But by evening I found something. One room in an old building on the edge of town. Cracked tiles, weak plumbing, a window that refused to close properly. But it had 4 walls, a roof, and most importantly, a lock. I paid 3 months upfront. The landlord barely looked at me, just took the money and handed over the key. I moved in that night, unpacked what little I had, placed the photo of Lillian on the narrow windowsill, cooked instant noodles on a hot plate, and then just sat for hours letting the silence settle. For the next few days I barely spoke to anyone. I avoided phone calls. Meredith didn't call, of course. Neither did Evan. And the kids, no, why would they? But I wasn't entirely forgotten. On the 4th day, as I sat on a park bench, watching pigeons fight over crumbs, I heard a voice. Gerald Whitmore, I'll be damned. I turned to see a familiar face. Walter Lang, an old friend and retired bricklayer I'd worked with decades ago. His hair was thinner, his gut thicker, but the fire in his eyes was the same. We embraced, and for a moment I felt like someone again. Over coffee at a nearby cafe I told him everything. The house, the promise, the betrayal, the cab ride. I tried to keep my voice steady, but halfway through it cracked. Walter didn't interrupt. He just listened, eyes narrowed, jaw clenched. When I finished, he said just 3 words. Those bloody bastards. Then he added, "You're staying with me tonight. No argument." I declined, but the warmth in the offer stayed with me. And the next morning he returned with a plan. Walter had heard about the company I used to buy the house, Haven Estates. He remembered an article in the local paper about fraud, shady documents, lawsuits. He offered to dig deeper, said he had a nephew, Edwin, who was a lawyer. I didn't expect anything to come from it. I was too tired to hope. But Edwin called me the next day. Young, sharp, professional. He asked for every paper I had, contracts, receipts, the deed, emails. He came over, flipped through the documents carefully, and said the words I'd long stopped expecting. "You've been scammed, Mr. Whitmore. There may be a legal path forward." Apparently, Haven Estates had a history of selling properties with hidden liens, unresolved mortgages, or outright forged ownership. The house I'd bought was entangled in some nightmare of unpaid debts and shell corporations. "What does that mean?" I asked. "It means," Edwin said, "you may lose the house, but you might also be able to sue the developers and claim your money back, at least partially." I sat back stunned. That house, that symbol of family and redemption, wasn't even cleanly bought. And Meredith and Evan, did they know? Had they sensed something and kept silent? A week later, I got my answer. My phone rang. Meredith's name flashed on the screen. I hesitated. My hand hovered over the answer button. Then I pressed it. "Dad," she said immediately, her voice trembling. "We're being evicted. Some people came today with documents. They say the house was bought illegally. We have 3 days to get out." I said nothing. "Dad, are you there?" "Yes," I replied calmly. "We don't know what to do. Evan's panicking. We can't afford a lawyer. The kids are scared. Dad, please, can you help us?" There it was, the ask, the real reason for the call. "No apology," I said. "No explanation, just straight to begging." "Don't say that," she pleaded. "We're desperate." "So was I said, "the night you threw me out." Silence. Then quieter. "We made a mistake, but you're still our father. Please don't punish the kids for our decisions." My voice dropped to a whisper. "You told me you didn't need me. Remember that." "Dad, please." "I've learned my lesson, Meredith. I won't be used again." And I hung up. The screen dimmed in my hand. I placed the phone face down on the table, took a deep breath, and poured myself a cup of lukewarm tea. For the first time in weeks, I felt something that wasn't grief. I felt peace. The housewarming party should have been a celebration, a joyful gathering to mark new beginnings. Instead, it became the night everything unraveled. I woke early that day, heart pounding with a mix of hope and nervousness. Dressed in my best suit, the one Lillian had given me on our 50th anniversary, I polished my shoes and combed my hair carefully. I even spritzed on the cologne she loved, saving it for moments just like this. Downstairs, the house was alive with excitement. Meredith flitted from room to room, arranging flowers, placing candles, and double-checking the catering orders. Evan barked quiet commands, coordinating with the delivery crew and finalizing the guest list. Hazel and Clive helped decorate, their teenage enthusiasm mixing with a quiet tension I couldn't place. I offered to assist. "Dad, please just relax," Meredith said, forcing a smile. "We want you to enjoy the evening." Evan nodded firmly, adding, "It's better if you don't get involved. We've got this." Their tone felt like a subtle dismissal, but I swallowed the sting. When the guests started arriving, I stood by the doorway greeting faces I didn't recognize. None of them were old friends or colleagues from my past life. All were Meredith and Evan's acquaintances, their friends and coworkers, their community. I smiled, shook hands, and tried to make conversation, but I felt like a stranger in my own home. Later, a man in a sharp suit approached me. "This place has such history," he said. "How long has your family owned it?" Pride swelled in my chest. We just bought it, I replied. It's a fresh start for us all. He raised an eyebrow. You bought it? Before I could answer, Evan stepped in beside me, a forced smile on his face. Technically, it's ours. Gerald helped with the down payment, of course. We're very grateful. The warmth in his grip on my shoulder felt more like a warning. I swallowed my discomfort, nodded silently, and let him guide me away. As the evening wore on, I noticed the glances, the whispers behind hands, the conversations halting when I entered the room. At one point, Meredith brought me a plate of food and placed it silently on the table in my room. The kids need to study, she explained without looking up. I sat alone, listening to the muffled laughter and music, feeling more isolated than ever. Then, late into the night, Evan appeared at my door. It's time, he said coldly. Time for what? I asked. Time for you to leave. The guests don't need any distractions. My hands trembled with rage and disbelief. This is my house, I said, voice cracking. I bought this place for all of us, and now you're kicking me out. Not kicking you out, Evan replied, voice icy. Just asking you to leave for the night. For the night, I echoed, feeling the cold spread through my bones. Yes, no one needs to know you're gone. It's better this way. I grabbed my suitcase, packed my few belongings, clothes, photographs, a worn book Lillian gave me into it. As I passed the living room, Meredith caught my eye for a split second. No apology, no remorse, just a flicker of something I couldn't name. Outside, the cab waited. The driver gave me a sympathetic glance as I climbed in. Where to? He asked. I didn't know, anywhere but here. As the cab pulled away, I looked back at the house, my house, glowing warmly behind its windows. And inside, the family I had tried to build was celebrating without me. The hotel room was a far cry from the Victorian house I had dreamed of sharing with Meredith and her family. But it was shelter, at least. I spent the first few days there in a haze, eating takeout and staring blankly at the peeling wallpaper. The calls from Meredith were infrequent and fraught with tension. She rarely asked how I was, instead focusing on her own troubles, work stress, the kids' school problems, Evan's business struggles. I felt like a ghost. After 3 restless nights, I knew I couldn't stay in that hotel forever. I needed a home, even if it was small and humble. So I searched the city, dragging my suitcase from one rundown apartment to another. Eventually, I found a tiny place on the outskirts of town. A single room, a kitchenette barely big enough to swing a pot, and a bathroom with a leaky faucet. The landlord was curt but accepted my 3 months' rent upfront without complaint. I moved in and began unpacking what little I had. The photo of Lillian found a new spot on the windowsill where it caught the morning light. Days blurred into weeks. I took long walks, wandered through parks, and sat quietly on benches watching life go by. I was a spectator in a city I once called home. Then, unexpectedly, Walter appeared. An old friend from my construction days, Walter brought warmth and familiarity back into my life. We shared coffee and stories, laughter and long silences. He encouraged me to join the local bridge club, to reconnect with people who understood the value of friendship in later years. It was through Walter that I learned more about Haven Estates, the company that sold me the house. Fraud, he said simply. They tricked you, Jerry, but don't blame yourself. Together, we met his nephew Edwin, a lawyer willing to take my case. Edwin explained that Haven Estates had sold properties with hidden debts and forged documents. The house I had bought was tangled in legal troubles, and the deed I signed was complicated by liens and mortgages. The house Meredith, and Evan now claimed as their own, was at risk of being seized. Despite the shock, there was a flicker of hope. I could fight for my money back. One afternoon my phone rang. Meredith's name flashed on the screen. When I answered, her voice cracked. We're being evicted, Dad. We don't know what to do, please help us. The irony was bitter. After everything they were asking me, the man they had pushed out to save them. I listened quietly, then said firmly, I won't help you this time. The line went silent. I placed the phone down, tears threatening but unfallen. I realized then that the family I thought I had was gone. But maybe, just maybe, a new life awaited. The call from Meredith was a breaking point. She was desperate, pleading for help to avoid eviction from the house I had bought, the very home I was forced to leave. I sat in my small apartment, the worn furniture and faded walls a stark contrast to the dream I once held. Walter sat nearby, listening as I told him the story. Those swindlers from Haven Estates, he said with disgust, you got caught in their net. His words echoed what Edwin, the lawyer, had explained during our meeting. Haven Estates wasn't just a company, it was a web of deceit. They sold properties burdened with hidden debts, forged documents, and mortgages that never got cleared. The house Meredith and Evan called home was still tied up in these illegal chains. Edwin had uncovered that the company's directors had siphoned funds before declaring bankruptcy, leaving victims like me with empty pockets and legal battles. The eviction notices had been served. The bank was foreclosing, and my daughter's family was being forced out. I was a victim, but also a witness to their recklessness. Edwin advised me to file a lawsuit to reclaim my money. It was a long, uncertain road, the chance of full recovery slim but not impossible. I signed the documents, feeling a strange mix of relief and exhaustion. Then Meredith called again. We're being evicted in 3 days, she sobbed. We need your help, please. I held the phone tightly. No, I said. I can't help those who abandoned me. The line went silent. I sat back, eyes closed, feeling the weight of loss but also a newfound strength. Walter's presence was a balm. He reminded me that family wasn't always blood. It was respect, loyalty, and love. I vowed not to let myself be used again. Not even by those I once called my own. Days after filing the lawsuit, I received an unexpected knock on my door. There stood Meredith, exhausted, pale, and holding a small bag. Her eyes searched mine, a mix of guilt and desperation. I'm sorry, Dad, she said softly. We made terrible mistakes. Evan and we want to make it right. I hesitated but stepped aside, letting her in. The apartment was small, cramped, a far cry from the house we once shared. She looked around, unable to hide her discomfort. I'm not here to ask for money, she began. I just want family again. Her voice cracked, and I saw the little girl I once knew buried beneath years of hardship. But years of betrayal left scars hard to heal. I told her of my plans to move forward alone, to travel, volunteer, and find peace. I've learned that family isn't just blood, I said. It's respect, trust, and love, and if those aren't there, they're just strangers. Meredith nodded, tears flowing freely. We spoke late into the night, not as father and daughter, but as two people trying to find closure. The next morning, I felt a quiet calm. I was no longer the man defined by pain and loss. I was a man reclaiming his life. A month after that final conversation with Meredith, the court ruled in my favor. I wouldn't recover every cent, Edwin had warned me, but I'd receive a substantial portion of my savings back, enough to begin again. And that's exactly what I did. I bought a modest 2-story cottage on a quiet lane not far from the home Lillian and I had once shared. It wasn't grand. It wasn't meant to impress, but it was mine, entirely mine. No forged signatures, no joint deeds, no broken promises. Just a front porch, a garden that bloomed in the spring, and enough space for peace to finally settle in. Walter helped me move in. We celebrated the way old men do, whiskey in mismatched mugs, and a silence that said more than words ever could. "You did it," he said, raising his glass. "I didn't think I had it in me," I replied. He chuckled. "You always did, you just needed someone to remind you." In the months that followed, I built a new routine. I joined a watercolor class at the senior center, something Lillian always wanted to do together but never had the time for. Turned out, I wasn't terrible. I painted the garden out back, the birds on the fence, the street after rain. I started volunteering at the local orphanage, reading to children, fixing broken shelves, helping with homework. One boy named Simon asked me once if I was anyone's grandfather. I said not anymore. He replied, "You can be mine." I stayed longer that day than I'd planned. Evenings were spent at the bridge club sharing laughs with old friends and newcomers alike. I was no longer just the man who lost his home. I was Gerald, a good player, a steady hand, a friend. News of Meredith and Evan still reached me occasionally, mostly through Walter's wife who spotted them at the discount store. Evan had lost his business. Meredith was cleaning houses now. Clive dropped out of school. Hazel worked nights at a grocery store. There was sadness in those stories, yes, but not regret. They had made their choices. I had made mine. And for once I chose myself. One afternoon, sitting on the porch with Walter, a letter arrived. From Frances Hazel. She had written it by hand. It was brief. She apologized. Said she was ashamed, that she missed the old days, that she understood now what had been lost. She didn't ask for anything. Just said she hoped I was well. That letter sat on my kitchen table for weeks. I didn't respond, not yet, but I didn't throw it away either. Because maybe, just maybe, time softens what anger cannot. But for now, I had everything I needed. A home, a purpose, and a peace I thought I'd never feel again. Lillian would have been proud. Not because of the house, not because of the bridge trophies or the quiet evenings, but because I finally remembered my own worth. And I never let anyone take it away again. One rainy morning, Gerald went to the local post office to check his mailbox. Among the usual junk and bills was a small, cream-colored envelope. The handwriting was familiar, too familiar. It was from Margaret, Lillian's sister. They hadn't spoken in nearly 7 years. Inside the envelope was a letter and an old photograph, a picture of Gerald and Lillian dancing at their wedding. "I heard what happened, Gerald. I wish I had written sooner. Lillian would never have let this happen, and maybe I should have done something, but you weren't the only one who felt alone." The letter was raw and filled with memories, both painful and joyful. Margaret invited him to visit her in the countryside, where she lived alone in the house she and her late husband had built. The image of the photo lingered in Gerald's mind for days. He decided to go. The countryside was calm. A soft wind brushed through tall grasses, and the cottage Margaret lived in sat between 2 old apple trees. She looked older, thinner, but her eyes still had the same sharpness Lillian once had. They embraced quietly, both surprised by the emotion that came so easily after years apart. They spent the weekend reminiscing about Lillian, about the old days, about Meredith as a child. Margaret told Gerald stories he'd never heard. How Lillian used to write poems in secret, how she doubted whether she had done enough in life. But more importantly, Margaret helped Gerald see something clearly. He had never failed his daughter. She failed herself, Margaret said. You gave her everything, that's what real fathers do, but you don't owe her the rest of your life. After weeks of silence, Hazel texted Gerald. Hi, Grandpa, I miss you. Can we talk? He hesitated. She had been cruel before, dismissive, cold. But she was young, and maybe, just maybe, this was a different voice. They met at a quiet park bench. She looked different, tired, but not fake. This wasn't the same girl who had mocked him. Hazel apologized, not just in words but in posture, tone, detail. She explained that Evan had filled their heads with lies, how he spun the story to make Gerald sound controlling, bitter, unstable. "But I know the truth now. I saw the deed papers. I know what you gave up." Tears welled in Gerald's eyes. He hadn't cried in months. Hazel reached into her bag and handed him a worn paperback copy of Mice and Men. "It was yours," she said. "I found it in a box when we were moving. I thought you'd want it back." That gesture meant more than all the apologies in the world. Evan's downfall wasn't sudden. It was slow, embarrassing, and deeply public. His company folded under tax fraud allegations. Friends stopped returning his calls. Meredith left her job to care for the children full-time, unable to keep up with bills. He reached out to Gerald, not to apologize but to negotiate. "I know you won the settlement," Evan said. "I think we can work something out, maybe reinvest together." Gerald almost laughed. "You mean, give you more of what you've already stolen?" Evan bristled. "You think you're the only one who suffered?" Gerald stood slowly, looked him square in the eyes. "No, but I am the only one who won't make the same mistake twice." And with that, he left Evan standing alone in the parking lot, holding onto nothing. Over time, Hazel continued to visit. She brought baked goods, helped Gerald paint the fence, sat with him during storms and asked questions about Lillian. Bit by bit, trust rebuilt, not perfectly, but with honesty. Clive never reached out. Meredith sent one last letter months later, offering nothing but a vague apology and a return address. Gerald never replied. Instead, he folded the letter, placed it inside a tin box with a note. "When you know who you are, write to me again. Until then, be well." He buried the box in the garden, beneath the rose bush Lillian would have loved. And life, real life, continued slow, rich, meaningful. Gerald smiled more. He laughed. He played chess with Simon from the orphanage. He cooked stew on Sundays and invited neighbors over. And every evening, before the sun dipped below the trees, he looked at Lillian's photo and whispered the same words. "You were right. I had more life in me than I thought." The summer passed quietly, the kind of peace that doesn't shout but hums gently in the background. Gerald found rhythm in the slowness of life. Each morning he brewed his tea, sat on the porch and watched the sun climb over the rooftops. Sometimes Hazel joined him. She didn't speak much during those mornings, but she didn't need to. Just being there, present, sincere, said everything. One afternoon, while sweeping the front path, Gerald noticed a familiar figure across the street. Meredith. She wasn't holding papers or gifts or desperate pleas. Just standing, watching, as if unsure whether she belonged anywhere near him. Their eyes met, and for a second neither of them moved. He didn't wave her away. But he didn't invite her in. She took the hint and walked on. That night Gerald lay in bed with the window open. A breeze carried in the soft scent of cut grass and distant rain. He closed his eyes and thought of Lillian. He didn't talk to her as much anymore, not because he forgot, but because some part of him had finally found rest. In the months that followed, Gerald started journaling, not about the betrayal, not about the lawsuit or the house or even his loneliness, but about rediscovering himself. He wrote stories, little moments, details of life he once overlooked. The way Hazel hummed when she peeled apples, the way birds returned each morning to the same fence post, the way kindness, quiet, consistent kindness, changed everything. At the orphanage, Simon asked if he could call him Grandpa again. Gerald said yes without hesitation, and for the first time in a long time the word didn't carry the weight of expectation or pain. It simply meant love, shared moments, trust earned. One crisp autumn morning, Gerald received a small envelope in the mail. Inside was a child's drawing stick figures beneath a red roof, written in crayon at the top, "Grandpa's real home." He laughed softly and pinned it to the fridge, next to a photo of Lillian. There were days when memories returned like tides, uninvited, cold, overwhelming. But they never stayed long anymore, because now each memory had a place to land, not in regret, but in understanding. One evening, as he sat beneath the porch light, sipping warm cider, Hazel joined him with a quiet smile. She handed him a small wooden box. "Made it in shop class," she said, brushing her hair behind her ear. "For your letters." He opened it. Inside, lined with felt, were all the notes, drawings, and keepsakes she'd brought over the months. "It's a bit early," she added, "but happy birthday." He didn't speak. He just reached over and held her hand. Not because he had to, but because this, finally, was the family he had been looking for. Not perfect, not the one he paid for, but real, chosen, deserved. And that made all the difference. Winter crept in slowly that year. The mornings arrived with frost on the windows, and Gerald found himself rising earlier just to light a small fire and warm the cottage before the sun caught up. His joints ached a little more, but the cold no longer made him feel old, just human. Hazel visited often, not out of guilt anymore, but out of habit. She'd bring pastries from a nearby bakery, sometimes books she thought he'd like, sometimes nothing but silence and shared time. On Sundays they cooked together potato soup, thick stews, even pies when they felt ambitious. The kitchen was always a little too small for two, but neither complained. They learned to move around each other with ease. One snowy afternoon, Hazel pulled a faded photo from her coat pocket. It was of Gerald, Lillian, and a very young Meredith on a beach somewhere. They all looked windblown and happy. Hazel pointed at it. "Do you miss her?" Gerald didn't have to ask who she meant. "Every day," he said, "but it's different now. I don't just miss her absence. I carry her presence." Hazel nodded slowly, her eyes fixed on the photo. "I think I understand that." Gerald smiled. "One day you really will." The house had become more than shelter. It was memory, healing, laughter, and forgiveness built into the walls. There were no expensive things, no polished marble or designer counters, but there was warmth, there was stillness, there was love. One night, as they decorated the tiny Christmas tree in the corner, Gerald paused mid-hang of an ornament, a delicate glass swan Lillian had once adored. Hazel noticed. "You okay?" He looked at the tree, then at her. "I thought I'd never have this again." "This?" she asked. "This," he said, gesturing to the lights, the quiet music playing on the radio, the smell of cinnamon in the air. "Family, not the one I thought I needed, the one that showed up anyway." Hazel didn't respond right away. She walked across the room, took the glass swan from his hands, and placed it gently at the center of the tree. "It belongs here," she said. He nodded. "So do you." Later that night, Gerald stepped out onto the porch. Snow fell gently under the yellow glow of the street lamp. He took a deep breath, his hands tucked into the pockets of his wool coat. Across the street, lights in other homes flickered like soft stars. Some windows glowed with fireplaces, others with televisions or laughter. He didn't envy any of them. His house, his life, had become whole again, not through wealth or perfection, but through truth and earned peace. In the distance, a dog barked and wind rustled the dry trees. Gerald stood there for a while, listening, just listening, to the quiet, to the world, to the soft, steady rhythm of a life that had finally come back to him. And in that stillness, he whispered under his breath, not to anyone in particular, not to the night or the sky, just to himself. "I'm home." Spring returned like a long-forgotten promise, slow at first, cautious, then sudden and bright. Gerald noticed it not in the trees or the air, but in the way his mornings felt lighter. The silence in his home wasn't as heavy anymore. It had turned into something peaceful. He had made peace with the quiet. It no longer reminded him of what was lost, but what had been found in its place. The garden, neglected through the frost, was beginning to stir again. Tiny green shoots pushed through the dirt as if daring the cold to return. Gerald knelt in the soil one morning, loosening roots, planting fresh herbs and tucking tulip bulbs into the earth. He worked slowly, with care, like each movement was a prayer for growth. Hazel helped him restain the porch railings that week. She was taller now, or maybe just carrying herself differently. When she spoke, there was weight in her words, a quiet thoughtfulness that hadn't been there before. "I'm applying to college," she told him one afternoon, wiping paint off her fingers with a rag. He looked up from the brush. "You are?" She nodded. "Community college for now. I want to study social work." Gerald smiled. "That's good work." "I think so too. I want to help people who have been forgotten." He didn't say anything right away, just reached out and squeezed her wrist gently. "You haven't been forgotten," he said. "You were just waiting to become who you really are." Hazel blinked fast, then nodded. "Thanks, Grandpa." She hadn't called him that in weeks, not because she forgot, but because she didn't need to say it. It had become natural again, not a title, but a truth. They spent the afternoon planting marigolds and patching up the birdhouse Lillian had once painted. Gerald found himself humming as he worked. Hazel joined in without asking what the song was. It didn't matter. The tune belonged to the moment. One evening after dinner, a knock came at the door. Gerald opened it to find a small envelope taped to the frame. No one was there. Inside was a letter, short, handwritten, and unsigned, but he recognized the careful script immediately. "Meredith." She didn't ask for anything. Not forgiveness, not money, not even a response. "I just wanted you to know I'm still thinking about you. I'm sorry, I truly am. I hope you're okay." He sat at the kitchen table for a long time afterward, staring at the folded paper. He didn't feel the sharp pain he once might have, just a dull ache, like pressing a bruise that had already begun to heal. He didn't reply. He didn't need to. Some things belonged to the past. Some wounds didn't need to be reopened just to prove they existed. Meredith had made her choice. Gerald had made his. And now he chose this life, this version of family, of peace. On the first truly warm day of spring, Gerald invited Simon and the other kids from the orphanage over for a picnic in the backyard. Hazel helped set up sandwiches and fold out chairs. Laughter filled the air, unforced and bright. Someone brought a kite. Someone else brought a radio. Gerald brought stories. He watched them all smiling, playing, alive, and something settled deeper into his chest. It wasn't just peace anymore. It was pride, purpose. After the sun dipped below the rooftops and the kids were packed into cars, waving goodbye, Gerald sat alone on the porch steps. The wind was soft. The sky was streaked with violet and gold. Hazel came out with 2 mugs of tea and handed him one. "You happy, Grandpa?" she asked. He looked at her, really looked. And then he said, with no hesitation, no lingering doubt, no shadow behind the words, "I am now." A few weeks later, Gerald stood in the garden, now fully in bloom. The tulips had opened, bright reds, yellows, and soft whites swaying gently in the breeze. Bees buzzed lazily, dipping in and out of petals, and the old birdhouse had its first visitors, a small family of wrens chirping eagerly each morning. He watered the herbs slowly, then paused to press his fingers into the dirt, rich, warm, alive. Hazel's college acceptance came by email. She burst through the door one afternoon, breathless and beaming, phone in hand. "I got in," she said, barely able to speak the words. Gerald smiled wider than he had in years. "I never doubted it." She wrapped her arms around him, tight and sudden. "You're the only reason I believed I could." He didn't know how to respond, so he just held her for a long time. They celebrated that night with a simple dinner. Nothing fancy, just roasted chicken, potatoes, and warm bread. The kind of meal that didn't need to be loud to be full. They lit a candle in the center of the table, not for ceremony but for peace. After Hazel went home, Gerald cleaned the dishes slowly. When the last plate was dry, he walked into the living room and sat by the window. The house was quiet again. Not empty, just still. The kind of stillness that welcomes you in instead of pressing you down. The phone rang once around 9. He checked the caller ID. It was Evan. He stared at the screen as it buzzed once, twice, then stopped. He let it go. He knew what the call would be, a last thread, a hand reaching backward, but he had nothing left to give to that story, nothing that wasn't already spent. Instead, he picked up the leather-bound journal Hazel had gifted him last winter. He opened to a fresh page and began writing. Not about Evan, not about Meredith, but about the way the house smelled when bread was baking, the way Simon's face lit up when Gerald taught him how to tie a tie for the first time, the way Hazel hummed to herself when she read quietly on the porch swing. He wrote about life, not what had been taken, but what had grown in its place. He wrote late into the night, the ink running smooth across the paper, the candle flickering low beside him. Outside, the stars blinked one by one into the dark sky. Eventually, he closed the journal, capped the pen, and sat back. He looked around the room, the soft curtains Hazel had picked, the bookshelf half filled with borrowed novels and old photographs, the framed letter from the orphanage thanking him for his volunteer work. He was surrounded by a life he had built, not bought, brick by brick, moment by moment. And for the first time in a long, long while, he didn't feel like a man holding onto something. He felt like a man simply living. And that at last was enough. Summer came in slowly, as if testing the world's patience before pouring itself fully over everything. Gerald didn't mind the heat. It meant longer evenings, open windows, and soft light that lingered in the house well past dinner time. The garden had become his pride. Neighbors he'd barely known before began to stop by just to admire the color, the roses along the side fence, the basil thriving in a planter Hazel painted, the wild patches of lavender buzzing with bees. Some days, a neighbor named June brought lemonade and sat with him beneath the tree while they talked about nothing: books, the weather, her late husband's terrible taste in music. She was kind, sharp, and not the type to pry. Gerald appreciated that. Hazel's summer job started at the community library. She stopped by in the mornings on her way and again in the evenings after closing. Sometimes she brought books for him. Other times, just her stories, the people she met. The elderly man who checked out nothing but books on lighthouses. The teenager who quietly returned the same romance novel 3 times. The little girl who refused to read anything except animal encyclopedias. One evening, they sat on the porch and watched a thunderstorm roll in across the trees. Hazel rested her head against the railing. Do you ever wonder what things would have looked like if none of it had happened? If the housewarming, if the betrayal, if Mom and Evan hadn't done what they did? Gerald thought for a moment. I used to, he said, but now not so much. Why not? He glanced at her, smiling softly. Because everything that mattered survived, and everything that didn't. She nodded slowly, letting the words settle between them. Lightning lit up the sky, a rumble followed, rain tapped softly on the roof. And still neither of them moved. There was no tension in the air anymore. No unspoken weight, no strain in the silence. Just warmth, the kind that comes not from blood but from something more honest, choice. The deliberate act of showing up, again and again. Weeks passed, and Gerald received an invitation in the mail. The orphanage was throwing a summer celebration and wanted him to attend as a guest of honor. At first he hesitated. He didn't want a spotlight, he didn't need thanks. But Hazel nudged him, said the kids would be excited, and so he agreed. On the day of the event, he wore his best shirt, the one Hazel had ironed for him that morning. Simon met him at the entrance with a wide grin and a paper crown made of gold glitter and construction paper. "This is for you," he said proudly. Gerald laughed. "It's been a while since I wore a crown." "You're the king of kindness now," Simon said solemnly. Gerald wore it all afternoon. There were games, music, and too many cupcakes. At one point, a group of children pulled him into a chaotic rendition of musical chairs. He didn't win. His knees were no match for the 10-year-olds, but he didn't mind losing. Because he had already won everything that mattered. That evening back at home, Hazel asked if he'd had fun. "I haven't laughed that much in years," he admitted, rubbing his legs. "Might be sore for a week." "You were kind of a big deal." He chuckled. "Don't let it go to my head." They sat quietly for a while, the breeze fluttering the curtains. Hazel glanced over at him, more serious now. "Do you ever think about forgiving Mom?" Gerald's face softened. He looked at the window, watching the leaves sway outside. "I already have," he said, "but that doesn't mean I have to let her back in." Hazel didn't push. She understood. Sometimes forgiveness wasn't an open door. Sometimes it was just a closed one you no longer knocked on. Later that night, Gerald wrote one more page in his journal. Not about the past, not about the pain. Just a list, simple things. The basil needs watering. Hazel is becoming the woman I hoped Meredith would be. Simon wants to be a writer. I laughed today. I feel light again. The world is still good. And at the bottom of the page, without thinking, he added one final line. I lived. And the ink dried slowly on those words, not as an ending, but as a quiet, perfect truth. Autumn crept in gently, brushing the trees with fire-colored leaves and crisping the air just enough to make Gerald reach for his old cardigan. The evenings came sooner now, and with them, a golden hush settled across the town. The light changed, softer, slower, like the year itself was taking a breath. Gerald embraced the rhythm. Mornings meant tea on the porch wrapped in a blanket. Evenings meant reading by lamplight while the wind stirred outside. The quiet never felt empty anymore. It felt earned. Hazel had started school. She still visited often, though less frequently, balancing classes, studying, and a part-time job at the library. But when she did visit, it always felt like nothing had changed. She brought her thoughts, her questions, her stubborn honesty, and Gerald loved every second of it. One Saturday morning, she arrived carrying a small folder. I need your help with this paper, she said. It's about chosen families. He raised an eyebrow. You planning to write about me? Maybe, she grinned. You're kind of the thesis. They worked on it together for hours. Hazel typed while Gerald paced and told stories, pausing every so often to sip his tea or stare thoughtfully at the ceiling. They debated the definition of family, whether it was built, broken, rebuilt again, and whether love was stronger when it had been tested and survived. When she finally hit save and leaned back, she said quietly, I think if I hadn't found my way back here, I don't know who I'd be. Gerald reached over and patted her hand. I'm glad you did, he said, but I think you were always going to find your way. That's who you are. The trees outside turned more brilliant with each passing day, amber and rust and deep maroon. Gerald found himself walking more often, sometimes down to the park, sometimes past the house he had once bought for Meredith. He didn't linger. He didn't stop, just passed by like any stranger might. The house had changed. New shutters, a different family now, children's toys on the lawn. He felt no bitterness, only a distant ache, like remembering a song you once loved but no longer needed to hear. He kept walking. One morning he received a postcard in the mail. No return address, just a simple photo of a lighthouse and 5 words in neat handwriting. Thank you for not giving up. There was no signature, but he knew it was from Hazel. It stayed tucked inside his journal, where it marked a page filled with sketches of his garden and half-written memories of Lillian's laughter. Life wasn't dramatic anymore. It wasn't noisy, but it was full of slow joy, of small victories, of healing that didn't demand attention. And on the first day of November, Gerald stood in the backyard, raking the last of the leaves into soft, crisp piles. He paused to stretch his back and watched as a few birds darted past the trees, calling out to each other, wild and free. From behind him, Hazel's voice called out, "You missed a spot." He turned, smiled, and waved her over. They finished the raking together. Then they sat on the porch steps, cheeks pink from the cold, sipping cider from mugs that didn't match. No one said anything for a while, because in that moment, nothing needed to be said. And in the gentle quiet between seasons, between generations, between wounds and healing, Gerald sat fully inside his own life. Not a man lost, but a man finally, completely found.